Vrindavan and always engaged in the service of the Lord, of the spiritual master, and of the Vaishnavas. This Krishna consciousness movement is therefore very safe and easy. We have only to execute the order of the Lord and fully surrender unto him. We have only to execute the order of the spiritual master, preach Krishna consciousness, and follow in the path of the Vaishnavas. The spiritual master represents both Lord Krishna and the Vaishnavas. Therefore, by following the instructions of the spiritual master and by chanting Hare Krishna, everything will be all right. Very nice. Text number 8. By thus practicing severe austerities, Maharaj Prithu gradually became steadfast in spiritual life and completely free of all desires for fruitive activities. He also practiced breathing exercises to control his mind and senses, and by such control, he became completely free from all desires for fruitive activity. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word pranayama is very important in this verse because the Hatha yogis and Ashtanga yogis practice pranayama, but generally they do not know the purpose behind it. The real purpose of pranayama or mystic yoga is to stop the mind and senses from engaging in fruitive activities. The so-called yogis who practice in Western countries have no idea of this. The aim of pranayama is not to make the body strong and fit for working hard. The aim is worship of Krishna. In the previous verse, it was specifically mentioned that whatever austerity, pranayama, and mystic yoga practices Prithu Maharaja were performed for the sake of worshiping Krishna. Thus, Prithu Maharaj serves as a perfect example for yogis also. Whatever he did to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I think someone has to open the door.
I open. Yeah.
He did already. Whatever he did to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The minds of those who are addicted to fruitive activity are always filled with unclean desires. Fruitive activities are symptomatic of our polluted desires to dominate material nature. As long as one continues to be subject to polluted desires, he has to accept one material body after another. So-called yogis, without knowledge of the real purpose of yoga, practice it in order to keep the body fit. Thus, they engage themselves in fruitive activities, and thus they are bound by desire to accept another body. They are not aware that the ultimate goal of life is to approach Krishna. In order to save such yogis from wandering throughout the different species of life, the Shastras warn that in this age, such yogic practice is simply a waste of time. The only means of elevation is the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. King Prithu's activities took place in Satya Yuga, and in this age, this practice of yoga is misunderstood by fallen souls who are capable of practicing anything. Who are not capable of practicing anything. Consequently, the Shastras enjoin Kalo nasti eva nasti eva gatir anyata. The conclusion is that unless the karmis, jnanis, and yogis come to the point of devotional service to the Lord Krishna, Their so-called austerities and yoga have no value. Naradita. If Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not worshipped, there's no point in practicing meditational yoga, performing karma yoga, or culturing empiric knowledge. As far as pranayama is concerned, chanting of the holy name of the Lord and dancing in ecstasy are also considered pranayama. Well, that's good news. In a previous verse, Sanat Kumara instructed Maharaj Pita to engage constantly in the service of the Supreme Lord Vasudeva. Yet pada pankaja palasa vilasa bhaktya kama sayam gati tam udgrata yanti santa. Only by worshipping Vasudeva can one become free from the desires of fruitive activities. Outside of worshipping Vasudeva, the yogis and jnanis cannot attain freedom from such desires. Tadvam na rikta matayo yatayo pi rudha shoto ganastam aranam vaja vasudevam. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 22, Text 39. Here the word pranayama does not refer to any ulterior motive. The actual aim is to strengthen the mind and senses in order to engage them in devotional service. In the present age, this determination can be very easily acquired simply by chanting the holy names Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,
Hare. Thank you for enthusiastically chanting Hare Krishna. Haribol. Text number 9. Thus, the best amongst human beings, Maharaj Prithu, followed that path of spiritual advancement, which was advised by Sanat Kumar. That is to say, he worshipped the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Purport. In this verse, it is clearly said that Maharaj Prithu, practicing the pranayama yoga system, engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as advised by the saint Sanat Kumara. In this verse, the words Purusham Abhajat Purusharsabha are significant. Purusharsabha refers to Maharaj Prithu, the best amongst human beings, and Purusham refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The conclusion is that the best man amongst all men engages in the service of the Supreme Person. One Purusha is worshipable, and the other Purusha is the worshipper. When the Purusha who worships the living entity thinks of becoming one with the Supreme Person, he simply becomes bewildered and falls into the darkness of ignorance. As stated by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita 2.12, all living entities assembled in the battlefield, as well as Krishna himself, were also present in the past as individuals and would continue to be present in the future as individuals also. Therefore, the two Purushas, the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead, never lose their respective identities. Actually, one who is self-realized engages himself in the service of the Lord perpetually, meaning all the time, both in this life and in the next. Indeed, for devotees, there is no difference between this life and the next. In this life, A neophyte devotee is trained to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and in the next life, he approaches that Supreme Person in Vaikuntha and renders the same devotional service. Even for the neophyte devotee, devotional service is considered Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. Devotional service to the Lord is never considered a material activity, since he is acting on the Brahma Buddha platform. A devotee is already liberated. He therefore has no need to practice any other type of yoga in order to approach the Brahma Buddha stage. If the devotee adheres strictly to the orders of the spiritual master, follows the rules and regulations, and chants the Hare Krishna mantra, it should be concluded that he is already at the Brahma Buddha stage, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. Mam chayogi picharena bhakti yogena sevate sakunam samatidhyaitam prabhabhuyaya kalpate. One who is engaged in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus come to the level of Brahman. Well, that's very nice information, especially this verse also. Manchayo vipacharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunam samatidhyaitam brahmabhuyaya kalpate. One who is engaged in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Text number 10. Maharaj Prithu thus engaged completely in devotional service, executing the rules and regulations strictly according to principles 24 hours daily, and thus his love and devotion unto the Supreme Personality Godhead Krishna developed and became unflinching and fixed. Wow, that's what we should aim for. As devotional service should be unflinching and fixed. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The word Bhagavad Dharmina indicates that the religious process practiced by Maharaj Prithu was beyond all pretensions. That means that there was nothing fake about what he was doing. As stated in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.2, Dharma Projitakaita Votra, religious principles which are simply pretentious are actually nothing but cheating. Bhagavad Dharma is described by Viraraghava Acharya as Nivrita Dharmena, which indicates that it cannot be contaminated by material aspiration, as described by Srila Rupa Goswami. Anya Vilasita Sunyam Gyanakarmadi Anavritam Anukulyena Krishnan Suvanam Bhakti Uttama. When one who is not inspired by material desires and is not contaminated by the processes of fruitive activity and empiric speculation, fully engages in the favorable service of the Lord, his service is called Bhagavad Dharma, or pure devotional service. In this verse, the word karma does not refer, the word Brahmani does not refer to the impersonal Brahman. Impersonal Brahman is a subordinate feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And since impersonal Brahman worshippers desire to merge into the Brahman effulgence, they cannot be considered followers of Bhagavad Dharma. After being baffled in his material enjoyment, the impersonalist may desire to merge into the existence of the Lord. but a pure devotee of the Lord has no such desire. Therefore, a pure devotee is really Bhagavat Dharmi. It is clear from this verse that Maharaj Prithu was never a worshipper of the impersonal Brahman, but was at all times a pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhagavati Brahmani refers to one who is engaged in devotional service to the personality of Godhead. A devotee's knowledge of the impersonal Brahman is automatically revealed, and he is not interested in merging into the impersonal Brahman. Maharaj Prithu's activities in devotional service enabled him to become fixed and steady in the discharge of devotional activities without having to take recourse to the discharge of devotional service, the devotional activities. Maharaj Prithu's activities and devotional service enabled him to become fixed and steady in the discharge of devotional activities without having to take recourse to karma, jnana, or yoga. So this verse that's quoted, Anya Vilasita Sunyam Jnana Karmadya Navritam Anukuyena Krishnana Suvanam Bhaktir Uttama. When one who is not inspired by material desires and is not contaminated by the process of fruitive activity and empiric speculation fully engages in favorable service to the Lord, his service is called Bhagavat Dharma, or pure devotional service. That's a very important verse. Anya Vilasita Sunyam Jnana Karmanya Navritam Anukuyena Krishnana Salanam Bhaktir Uttama. Bhaktir Uttama means it is the highest level of devotional service. Okay. It is clear from this verse that Maharaj Prithu was never a worshipper of the impersonal Brahman, but was at all times a pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of God. Bhagavati Brahmani refers to one who is engaged in devotional service to the personality of God. A devotee's knowledge of the impersonal Brahman is automatically revealed, and he is not interested in merging into the impersonal Brahman. Maharaj Prithu's activities and devotional service enable him to become fixed and steady in the discharge of devotional activities without having to take recourse to karma, jnana, or yoga. Well, that's an important statement. You don't have to go step by step. First become a karma yogi, then a jnana yogi, or yogi. You simply chant Hare Krishna and follow the regulative principles of Krishna consciousness, and always stay in the association of genuine devotees, eat only prasadam, go on Sankirtan, and be regulated in your life. That means going to bed early, waking up early, and chanting Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Text number 11. By regularly discharging devotional service, Prithu Maharaja became transcendental in mind and could therefore constantly think of the lotus feet of the Lord. Because of this, he became completely detached and attained perfect knowledge by which he could transcend all doubt. Thus, he was freed from the clutches of false ego and the material conception of life. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In the Narada Pancharatma, devotional service to the Lord is likened unto a queen. When a queen gives an audience. Many maidservants follow her. The maidservants of devotional service are material opulence, liberation, and mystic powers. The karmis are very much attached to material enjoyment. The gyanis are very much anxious to become freed from material clutches. And the yogis are very fond of attaining the 8 kinds of mystic perfection. From the Narada Pancharatra, we understand that if one attains the stage of pure devotional service, he also attains all the opulences derived from fruitive activities, empiric philosophical speculation, and mystic yogic practices, or mystic yogic practice. Srila Bilvamangala Thakura therefore prayed in his Krishna Karnamrita, my dear Lord, if I have unflinchingly devotion to you, you become manifest before me personally, and the results of fruitive activity and empiric philosophical speculation, namely religion, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation, become like personal attendants and remain standing before me as if awaiting my order. Very nice. The idea here is that the Gyanis, by culture of Brahma Vidya, spiritual knowledge, struggle very hard to get out of the clutches of material nature. But a devotee, by dint of his advancement in devotional service, automatically becomes detached from his material body. When the devotee's spiritual body begins to manifest, he actually enters into his activities in transcendental life. At present, we have contacted a material body, material mind, and material intelligence. But when we become free from these material conditions, our spiritual body, our spiritual mind, and spiritual intelligence become manifest. In that transcendental state, a devotee attains all the benefits of karma, jnana, and yoga. Although he never engages in fruitive activities or empiric speculation to attain mystic powers, automatically mystic powers appear in his service. A devotee does not want any kind of material opulence, but such opulence appears before him automatically. He does not have to endeavor for it, because before this is, he does not have to endeavor for it because of his devotional service. He automatically becomes Brahma Bhuta. As stated before, this is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 14:26. Mam chayo vicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunam ansamatityahitam Brahma Bhuyayate. One who is engaged in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Well, what's important here is the statement, unfailing in all circumstances. That means that one does not stop being Krishna conscious at any moment of his life. Then he becomes transcendental to the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman, which means completely spiritual. Because of his regular discharge of devotional service, a devotee attains the transcendental stage of life. Since his mind is transcendentally situated, he cannot think of anything but the lotus feet of the Lord. This is the meaning of the word samarana Purkya. By constantly thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord, the devotee immediately becomes situated in Sudasattva, transcendental goodness. Sudasattva refers to that platform which is above the modes of material nature, including the mode of goodness. In the material world, the mode of goodness is considered to be representative of the highest perfection. But one has to transcend this mode and come to the stage of Sudasattva, or pure goodness, where the three qualities of material nature cannot act. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur gives the following example. If one has strong digestive power, after eating, he automatically lights a fire within his stomach to digest everything, and does not need to take medicine to aid his digestion. Similarly, the fire of devotional service is so strong that a devotee does not need to act separately to attain perfect knowledge or detachment from material attractions. A jnani may become detached from material attractions, but by prolonged discussions on subjects of knowledge, and may in this way finally come to the Brahmabhuta stage. But a devotee does not have to undergo so much trouble. By virtue of his devotional service, he attains the Brahmabhuta stage without a doubt. The yogis and jnanis are always doubtful about their constitutional position. Therefore, they mistakenly think of becoming one with the Supreme. However, a devotee's relationship with the Supreme becomes manifest beyond all doubt, and he immediately understands that his position is that of eternal servant of the Lord. Jnanis and yogis without devotion may think themselves liberated, but actually their intelligence is not as pure as that of a devotee. In other words, the jnanis and yogis cannot become factually liberated unless they become elevated to the position of devotees. Arura Kritrena Param Padam Tata Patanti Adho Nabrita Yusmat Angraya Srimad Bhagavatam 10th Canto, Chapter 2, verse 32. The jnanis and yogis may rise to the highest position, Brahman realization, but because of their lack of devotion unto the lotus feet of the Lord, they again fall down into material nature. Therefore, jnana and yoga should not be accepted as the real processes for liberation. By discharging devotional service, Maharaj Prithu automatically transcended all these positions. Since Maharaj Prithu was a Shaktavasha avatara of the Supreme Lord, he did not have to act in any way to attain liberation. He came from the Vaikuntha world, or spiritual sky, in order to execute the will of the Supreme Lord on earth. Consequently, he was to return home, back to Godhead, without having to execute jnana, yoga, or karma. Although Prithu Maharaj was eternally a pure devotee of the Lord, he nonetheless adopted the process of devotional service in order to teach the people in general the proper process for executing the duties of life and ultimately returning home back to Godhead. Very nice statements here. Text number 12. When he became completely free from the conception of bodily life, Maharaj Prithu realized Lord Krishna is sitting in everyone's heart as the Paramatma. Being thus able to get all instructions from him, meaning Krishna, He gave up all other practices of yoga and jnana. He was not even interested in the perfection of the yoga and jnana systems, for he thoroughly realized that devotional service to Krishna is the ultimate goal of life, and that unless the yogis and gyanis become attracted to Krishna Katha, narrations about Krishna, their illusions concerning existence can never be dispelled. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As long as one is too much absorbed in the bodily conception of life, he becomes interested in many different processes of self-realization, such as mystic yoga system, or the system utilizing the speculative empiric methods. However, when one understands that the ultimate goal of life is to approach Krishna, he realizes Krishna within everyone's heart, and therefore helps everyone who is interested in Krishna consciousness. Actually, the perfection of life depends on one's inclination to hear about Krishna. It is therefore mentioned in this verse, Yavat Gada Yavad Gadadra Gadaraja, Yavad Gadaraja Katasu Ratimna Puriyat. Unless one becomes interested in Krishna, in his pastimes and activities, there is no question of liberation by means of yoga practice or speculative knowledge. Having attained to the stage of devotion, Maharaj Prithu became uninterested in the practices of jnana and yoga and abandoned them. This is the stage of pure devotional life, as described by Rupa Goswami. Anya Vilasita Sunyam, Jnana Karmani Anavritam, Anukulyeni Krishnada Suranam Bhaktir Uttama. Real jnana means understanding that the living entity is the eternal servant of the Lord. This knowledge is attained after many, many births, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, 19th verse. Bahunam janmanam ante gyanavam mam prapadyante. In the Paramahamsa stage of life, one fully realizes Krishna as everything. Vasudeva sarvam iti Salamahatma Sadurlabha. When one understands fully that Krishna is everything and that Krishna consciousness is the highest perfection of life, he becomes a Paramahansa or Mahatma. Such a Mahatma or Paramahansa is very rare to find. A Paramahansa or pure devotee is never attracted by hatha yoga or speculative knowledge. He is simply interested in the unalloyed devotional service of the Lord. Sometimes one who was formerly addicted to these processes tries to perform devotional service and the jnana and yoga practices at the same time. But as soon as one comes to the unalloyed stage of devotional service, he is able to give up all other methods of self-realization. In other words, when one firmly realizes Krishna as the Supreme Lord, as the supreme goal, he is no longer attracted by mystic yoga practice or the speculative empirical methods of knowledge. Text number 13. In due course of time, when Prithu Maharaja was to give up his body, he fixed his mind firmly upon the lotus feet of Krishna, and thus, completely situated on the Brahma Buddha platform, he gave up the material body. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to a Bengali proverb, whatever spiritual progress one makes in life will be tested at the time of death. And Bhagavad Gita 8.6, it is also confirmed, Yam Yam Vapi Swaram Bhavam Teja Ante Kalevaram Tam Tam Evaiti Kwanteya Sadata Bhava Bhavita. Those who are practicing Krishna consciousness know that their examination will be held at the time of death. If one can remember Krishna at death, he is immediately transferred to Goloka Vrindavana or Krishna Loka, and thus his life becomes successful. Rita Maharaja, by grace of Krishna, could understand that the end of his life was near, and by the grace of Krishna could understand that the end of his life, was near, and thus he became very jubilant, very happy, and proceeded to completely give up his body on the Brahma Bhuta stage by practicing the yogic process. It is thoroughly described in the following verses how one can voluntarily give up this body and return home back to Godhead. The yogic process prescribed by Prita Maharaja at the time of death accelerated the giving up of this body while one is in sound health, physically and mentally. Every devotee desires to give up the body while it is sound physically and mentally. This desire was also expressed by King Kurushakara in his Mukunda Mala Sutra. Krishna Twadya Pada Pankaja Panjarantam Adyaiva Me Visitu Manasa Raja Hamsa Prana Prayana Samaye Kalpavata Pritahai Kata Varodana Vido Smaratam Kutaste. King Kurushakara wanted to give up his body while in a healthy state, and he thus prayed to Krishna to let him die immediately while he was in good health and while his mind was sound. When a man dies, he is generally overpowered by mucus and bile, and thus he chokes. Since it is very difficult to vibrate any sound while choking, it is simply by Krishna's grace that one can chant Hare Krishna at the time of death. However, by situating oneself in the Muktasana, or in the Muktasana position, a yogi can immediately give up his body and go to whatever planet he desires. A perfect yogi can give up his body whenever he desires through the practice of yoga. Well, for devotees, we're not really interested to become a perfect yogi and travel around the universe and visiting other planets and so forth. The devotee wants to be always engaged in the service of the Lord, whether in the material world or in the spiritual world. He doesn't want to be traveling around the world or in the spiritual world or the material world. He wants to be engaged specifically in devotional service with unalloyed devotion for the Lord. When Maharaj Prithu practiced a particular yogic sitting posture, he blocked the doors of his anus with his ankles, pressed his right and left calves, and gradually raised his life air upward, passing it on to the circle of his navel, up to his heart and throat, and finally pushed it upward to the central position between his two eyebrows. hours. Now you don't have to, and we don't, and I don't have to perform such a severe tapasya. If we simply chant Hare Krishna and follow the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness, eat only prasada, associate with devotees, always chanting Hare Krishna in the company of devotees, going on Sankirtan, and so forth. This is, you will attain the perfection of life without performing very severe tapasya. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The sitting posture described herein is called Muktasana. In the yoga process, after following the strict regulative principles, controlling, sleeping, eating, and mating, one is allowed to practice the different sitting postures. The ultimate aim of yoga is to enable one to give up this body according to his own free will. One who has attained the ultimate summit of yoga practice can live in the body as long as he likes, or as long as he is not completely perfect. Leave the body to go anywhere within or outside the universe. Some yogis leave their bodies to go to the higher planetary systems and enjoy the material facilities therein. However, intelligent yogis do not wish to waste their time within this material world at all. They do not care for the material facilities in higher planetary systems, but are interested in going directly to the spiritual sky, back home, back to Godhead. So that is our motto. We're going home, back to Godhead. That's the, let's see, motto of the devotee. We're going back to Godhead. From the description in this verse, it appears that Maharaj of Prithu had no desire to promote himself to the higher planetary systems. He wanted to return home immediately back to Godhead. Although Maharaj Prithu stopped all practice of mystic yoga after realizing Krishna consciousness, he took advantage of his previous practice and immediately placed himself on the Brahmabhuta platform in order to accelerate his return to Godhead. What is the Brahmabhuta platform? It's a platform of devotional service. The aim of this particular system of asana, known as the sitting posture for liberation or muktasana, is to attain success in Kundalini chakra and gradually raise the life from the Muladhara chakra to the Swadhisthana chakra, then to the Manipura chakra and Anahata chakra, the Vishwa chakra, the Vishuddha chakra, and finally to the Ajna chakra. When the yogi reaches the Ajna chakra between the two eyebrows, he is able to penetrate the Brahma Randra, or the hole in his skull. So on the top of the skull, or the top of the head, there is a very small hole. When a child is born, that Brahmarandra, or hole in the skull, there is a very soft part on the top of the head. You can put your finger on it, push it down and up. But as we get older, that soft area becomes harder and harder and becomes smaller and smaller. It doesn't get harder and harder, but it gets smaller and smaller. So we do have this little hole on the top of our head. It is called the Brahmarandra, and it is for yogis. They do yoga to exit from the body, through that little hole called the Brahmarandra. That's mystical yoga. As devotees, we don't have to do that. We just depend on chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And we can attain the same perfection of yogic process as the severe yogis do. So it says, when the yogi reaches the Ajna chakra between the two eyebrows, he's able to penetrate the Brahmarandra, or the hole in his skull, and go to any planet he desires, up to the spiritual kingdom of Vaikuntha or Krishna Loka. The conclusion is that one has to come to the Brahma Bhuta stage. It means spiritual, the spiritual stage for going back to Godhead. However, those who are in Krishna consciousness or who are practicing bhakti yoga, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, can return to Godhead without even practicing the Muktasana process. The purpose of Muktasana practice is to come to the Brahma Bhuta stage, but without being in the Brahma Bhuta stage, one cannot be promoted to the spiritual sky. Brahma Bhuta means one is transcendental to the modes of material nature. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 14:26, Mam chayo vibhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. Sagunam samatitya Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. The bhakti yoga, practicing bhakti yoga, is always situated on the Brahma Bhuta stage. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. If a devotee is able to continue on the Brahma Bhuta stage, Brahma Bhuta platform, he enters the spiritual sky automatically after death and returns to Godhead. Consequently, a devotee need not feel sorry for not having practiced the Kundalini chakra or not penetrating the 6 chakras one after another. As far as Maharaj Prithu was concerned, he had already practiced this process, and since he did not want to wait for the time when his death would occur naturally, he took advantage of the Sat chakra penetration process and thus gave up the body according to his own free will and immediately entered the spiritual sky. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we'll stop right there and we'll pick up text 15 tomorrow. And our takeaway today is Mam chayo vibhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunam samatitya Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. The bhakti yoga, practicing bhakti yoga, is always situated on the Brahma Bhuta stage. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate, that means transcendental stage. If a devotee is able to continue on the Brahma Bhuta platform, he enters the spiritual sky automatically after death and returns to Godhead. Consequently, a devotee need not feel sorry for not having practiced the Kundalini chakra or not penetrating the 6 chakras one after another. As far as Maharaj Prithu was concerned, he had already practiced this process, and since he did not want to wait for the time when his death would occur naturally, he took advantage of the Sat chakra penetration process and thus gave up the body according to his own free will and immediately entered the spiritual sky. Okay, well, that'll be the end today of our lesson on Canto 4, chapter 23, and verse 14. And our takeaway from this is Mam Chayovi Bicharina Bhakti Yogena Sevate Sagunam Samatitya Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. The Bhakti yogi practicing Bhakti Yoga is always situated on the Brahma Buddha stage. Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, that means the transcendental stage. If a devotee is able to continue on the Brahma Buddha platform or the transcendental devotional service platform, he enters the spiritual sky automatically after death and returns to Godhead. Consequently, a devotee need not feel sorry for not having practiced the Kundalini chakra or not penetrating the six chakras one after another. As far as Maharaj Pritha was concerned, he had already practiced this process, and since he did not want to wait for the time when his death would occur naturally, he took advantage of the Sat Chakra penetration process and thus gave up the body according to his own free will and immediately entered the spiritual sky. So, if we simply follow Krishna consciousness seriously, controlling the senses and keeping them engaged always in the devotional service of the Lord, and this, when we say controlling the senses, the sixth sense is the mind, or so one has to control not only the breathing and other physical things, but has to also control the mind by keeping it focused on Krishna by constantly chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Then one has a spiritual life, and one can choose anytime he wants to go back to Godhead and give up the material body to his own free will and immediately enter the spiritual sky. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. That is our takeaway from today. As far as Maharaj Pritha is concerned, he had already practiced this process, meaning Kundalini chakra and all those different yogic processes. And since he did not want to wait for the time when his death would occur naturally, he took advantage of the Sat Chakra penetration process. In other words, giving up his body by basically giving up eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. In other words, not eating and sleeping, let's put it like that. And took advantage of the Sat Chakra penetration process and thus gave up the body according to his own free will and immediately entered the spiritual sky. So, oftentimes, even devotees who desire to give up their body and go back to Godhead, they stop eating and even drinking anything, or at least they only drink very little water, but they give up eating and they become emaciated, very, very skinny, and prepare themselves to go back to Godhead. Now, not everybody can do that, but some devotees do that to free themselves from any material attachments and any material things that seem to be very nice for sense gratification. They give everything up by basically giving up eating and sleeping and just meditating always on the Holy Lord. Okay, so we'll stop right there. Now, takeaway is the following statement. Prithu Maharaj gradually raised his air of life up to the hole in his skull, whereupon he lost all desire from material existence. Gradually, he merged his air of life with the totality of air, his body with the totality of earth, and the fire within his body with the totality of fire. And in the purport it says, when the spiritual spark is described as 1/10,000th part of the tip of a hair, is forced into material existence, the spark is covered by gross and subtle material elements. I didn't think I read that before, so let's go back a page where it says, Mam Chayo Vibhicharine Bhakti Yogena Sevate Sadhanam Samati Jaitan Brahma Bhuyaya Prapate. The Bhakti Yogi practicing Bhakti Yoga is always situated on the Brahma Bhuta stage, in other words, transcendental stage, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. If a devotee is able to continue on the Brahma Bhuta platform or the transcendental platform without hankering any material sense gratification, he enters the spiritual sky automatically and after death and returns to Godhood. Consequently, a devotee need not feel sorry for not having practiced the Kundalini chakra or not penetrating the 6 chakras one after another. As far as Maharaj Pritha was concerned, he had already practiced this process, and since he did not want to wait for the time when his death would occur naturally, he took advantage of the Sat Chakra penetration process and thus gave up the body according to his own free will and immediately entered the spiritual sky. Of course, we should not do that. We're not on the level of Rita Maharaj to perform such a type of self-abnegation. However, if we simply follow the principles of Krishna consciousness, no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication, and always chanting Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and engage always in devotional service, and especially take nice prasada and chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Then we can attain the same thing that Maharaj Prithu attained without going through the very arduous or hard process of mystic yoga. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. Just chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Don't worry about all the technical yoga processes. The best yoga process is to chant Hare Krishna constantly and take nice prasadam and associate with devotees and never stop chanting Hare Krishna. Then you'll achieve the same thing that the mystic yogis achieved with a lot of difficulty and a lot of self-abnegation, which means performing severe tapasya. Our tapasya is chanting, dancing, and feasting. That's much more enjoyable than doing all the yogic practices of the yogis. Our yogic practice is chanting Hare Krishna, dancing in ecstasy, and hearing lectures given by devotees, and engaging day and night in devotional service. This is our takeaway today. Thank you very much. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Thank you very much, my young friend. You are a genuine devotee. Haribol. Okay, we'll stop right there and pick up again 11 hours from now. And this Krishna consciousness is eternal. It is the life of a devotee. And we should always associate devotees, take nice prasadam with them, and regularly hear Bhagavad Gita spoken or Srimad Bhagavatam spoken by a genuine devotee. Hare Krishna. Okay, Hari Bol. Now I'm going to start chanting.
Maharaj, I have a question.
Hare Krishna. Yeah.
In Canto 4.23.11, you mentioned the Brahm comes to the level of Brahman. What's the meaning of that?
That means transcendental level, where one is not attracted to anything material. It's only attracted to Krishna and engaging in Krishna service. That's Brahma Buddha stage. Okay. When you lose all attraction to material things and only think of Krishna and engage in Krishna service, think Krishna prasadam and so forth, that's called Brahma Buddha stage.
In Grahastha stage, can we come in
Yes.
Brahman level?
Yeah. Yes, you can. Prabhupada was married. Right. He had 5 kids, but he attained that transcendental position by chanting Hare Krishna and following the regulative principles very strictly. Hare Bol. Yes, you can. You can become a pure devotee even though you're married, even though you have children, even though
Did
a
you
woman,
eat with me?
there's nothing that will hold you back.
If you eat with me, and if it's on, I don't want to eat alone. I want to eat alone. No, I want Name because.
Hello, नहीं है वो
No, I want you to melt the name in properly.
Huh?
Should I disconnect?
It's what?
Should I disconnect?
Yeah. Was he asking a question or is he just talking?
I think they were not on mute, they were talking.
Babuji, Maharaji, Tulsi, the number